Corrinne May, welcome to Power and Witness.
Thank
You run
you.
the show, and I want to ask you just a few questions about music, but maybe a little bit about your background. You're
Sure.
from Singapore, but you live half the time in LA area, is that right?
Yeah, so I've been in LA since 99. So we moved to LA after I graduated from the Berklee College of Music in Boston. So I've been there since 99, which is basically most of my adult life. But I grew up in Singapore until I was about 23, and then I moved to the US. So yeah, right now we kind of, well, as of pre-COVID times, we used to go back every half a year to Singapore. Ever since my daughter was born back in 2009, we figured we'd spend more time with the family over there, let her experience life with her grandparents, have time with her cousins, especially since she's an only kid. But so we've been doing this back and forth really nicely, between Singapore and LA, and I've got great friends in both places. But starting from COVID times, well, back in 2020, we kind of adopted a cat when we were back in Singapore. It's like once you adopt a cat, you can't really, leave the cat with your friends for 6 months of the year.
Right.
And then the next thing that happened was a year ago, I got appointed as a choir director for the 5 p.m. Mass at a church called St. Joseph's in Singapore on Sunday. So once you start a choir, you think it's just, initially I thought, okay, choose the music, rehearse the people. But then I realized it was more than that. It was about forming a community. It was about having a place where these young adults could come together and share their faith and learn about their faith through the music. It was almost like I was being called to sort of be a kind of a shepherd for them through this music. So it's been interesting. So we've been having to spend more time in Singapore of late. So I'm kind of missing LA, but I'm seeing that the Lord is maybe asking me to spend more time over there.
And your husband's work
My
allows
husband.
him to work in both places? Or?
Yeah, so we're both musicians, which helps because he can work from here in the States. He can work from Singapore. The great thing is that technology has helped to bridge that gap. So he can just send off his, he works as a musician and he does a lot of music library work. He composes. So he gets his commissions from people, one of the companies he works for is based in New York. So they'll just send him a message, say, oh, Kavin, we need some stuff, some film trailers. We need some music to embed with this, TV show. Send us the tracks by this time and this time. And he can just send it off online, or through the computer. My daughter is homeschooled, so that has helped. Like she was in school, elementary school in LA for a while. And we were doing the back and forth thing with school in Singapore and school in LA. And then we converted to just full-time homeschooling because it was just easier to travel and to bring school with us. And it was easier for us to be able to incorporate the value system that we want her to grow up with and to see the world at the same time. So it's helped, just with that.
I love the story you told on the show about helping your dad play the organ. How old were you at that point?
I think I was about 5. I remember being about 5 or so. And he was playing, I can't remember what he was playing, but we had one of those little, Yamaha Electone organs. It had a couple of pedals. It wasn't like a church pipe organ, but it had 2 manuals, and he was playing some sort of a folksy pop song. And he was just getting the chords wrong. He was getting the bass pedal wrong. And I just could not stand it because I could hear that jarring dissonance of it, and he couldn't. So I thought, oh, why isn't he moving his foot? It's not supposed to be there. So I just went over. I just shifted I remember like kneeling down and just crawling to get to his foot, and just moving his foot to the right pedal. Yeah. And I don't know if he was surprised or anything.
Were you taught at that point how to play yourself, or did you know this pedal, or is this by ear? And then
I think it was by ear. It was by ear because I wasn't a very good sight reader because I relied a lot on my ear. And I remember that when I started taking piano lessons, I didn't like reading that sheet music. So what I would do, I would kind of, I would try to be smart about it. So I would ask my piano teacher to play the piece first. And she would think that, oh, she's demonstrating some stuff, right? But for me, I was just taking it all in. And so that when she was done playing the piece, I knew what it was, I could play it back. I didn't really have to rely so much on the sheet music, so I was kind of cheating that way.
Wow.
You know, but I think, but now I get to sight read much better because, well, I was a church musician for many years in LA, and sometimes when you're a church musician and cantors come in with music that you've never seen before, especially if it's Spanish music, because in LA we've got a huge population of people who speak Spanish. And so he came in with, you know, he would come in continuously with all this music that I'd never seen before, like 15 minutes before mass starts, and I have to scramble to learn this music. So I had to rely on my sight reading, through which my sight reading improved, and that was only in my 20s. So.
And when you were at Berkeley, and is it Berkeley or Berkeley?
I think it almost sounds the same way, like Berkeley in California, Berkeley. So the way it's spelled is Berklee.
Oh,
yeah.
Berklee.
Yeah, it's a name. It's actually a reverse of the name of the person who founded the school. I think his name is Leeberk, Leeberk. So they just switched it around and called it Berkeley. Very original. So yeah, it's pronounced Berkeley, and that's why I went for music school in Boston. And I spent about 2.5 years there. It was my second college degree. So the first one was in NUS in Singapore, National University of Singapore. I got my English Lit degree there, my mass communication degree there, and then I decided to get my second one in music. Yeah.
And relative to your classmates at the music school, did you just fit right in, or did you have special abilities kind of thing? Or
well, so for the first 3 months, I had to stay in a dorm, and all the international students had to do that. Special abilities. Well, it was nice to be able to be in music school and to hear all the music that was coming out from all the practice rooms, and to realize that, you know, even though you felt you were special in terms of the whole music thing, you realize that there are a whole bunch of other musicians who have different gifts in very many different varied ways. So it was good for me to have this place where I could hear people writing songs and doing really well, singing them. And then in the next room, you would have someone, you know, practicing his electric guitar and really, really, you know, playing beautiful stuff. So it was a humbling experience, but it was also very inspiring. And it helped me to realize my talent in music, you know, was not like a general idea of music, but it got me to understand I could get into songwriting and get into being a singer-songwriter. It allowed me to have that little space to play around and to experiment and to try out different ways of music. You know, whether I would be better at producing music and arranging music, which I realized I was not, because I didn't like the technical part of it, like the mixing and all the and turning the knobs. I didn't enjoy that. Initially, I thought I was going to, but I wasn't so much of the engineer mindset. So then I would sit in on a songwriting class, and there's this teacher called Pat Pattison, amazing songwriting teacher. So I would sit in on the class just, you know, curious about what this songwriting class was, because I never realized that songwriting could be learned that way as a craft. Because previously, I just sort of, you know, whatever inspiration came into my mind from a musical perspective, I would just play it on the piano, try to fit some words into it, and think, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
But this guy, he came from a literature background, so he understood how to explain the craft of lyric writing in terms of literature. And he really demystified the craft of it for me by pointing out certain tricks you could do, certain ways of crafting the song, like you know, how rhythm and rhyme were so important, and structure, so that you could carry the ideas into a song. How the first words and the last words of every line were important. They were spotlighted lines, spotlighted words. So if you wanted something to really stand out, you would put it right at the beginning or right at the end. And our ear remembers the very last word in every line. So if you wanted to rhyme something and make it pair up with another idea, you would rhyme that, you know, maybe perfectly. If you didn't want those two ideas to go together, you would stick in something that wasn't a rhyme at the end, so that the ear would move on to the next rhyme. And then you could sort of pair those two ideas that rhymed together. And then you could sort of, you know, craft it such that...
Let me ask you real quick,
Yeah.
like the rhyming, would that be like literal rhyming of sound, or like in a broader sense, a rhyming of idea or synonym or something?
Oh,
Or,
that's interesting that you brought
yeah.
that up. Yeah. So primarily the rhyming of words.
Words.
So he recommended us using a rhyming dictionary, and not a rhyming dictionary in terms of the alphabetical rhyming dictionary, but a rhyming dictionary based on sound. So there's one that he recommends from Clement Wood. You can find it probably on Amazon or so.
Mm-hmm.
And it rhymes the vowels, it rhymes the sounds. So it's really easy to sort of come up with more ideas. So one of the ways that I learned for channeling and for getting more inspiration out of, say, a single idea, was to use a title line, or some idea you had about the song. Like, say, Fly Away. I have one song called Fly Away. If you took that title and you said, I want to write a song called Fly Away, and then you took one word, you take that word fly, you run it through the rhyming dictionary, and you look for all the perfect rhymes, which are the words that, buy, cry, all those letters. And then you look for those that maybe are not so closely linked together, like bribe or crime, So some words which are not so closely linked in that sound, but which could work together. Because when you sing a word, you can get away with a lot more words that don't totally rhyme with singing than you can do so with reciting poetry.
I'm thinking of Neil Diamond. He says, what did he say? Like, songs you sang to me, something you bring to me. Sometimes he would force the rhyme,
Oh, yeah.
You were mourning, I was night.
Yeah, if it sounds forced, then I think the listener will probably feel that too. So it's kind of hard that way. But yeah, so rhymes are actually really important because they help the ear to cling onto ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's why if you slogans, mottos, all those short little phrases that people throw around, if they rhyme, they stick in the brain so much more. It's like the nursery rhymes that we learned as kids,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the literature component of it, as I've noticed that, like with preachers, I know a priest that studied literature and stuff, and then he just had a way of preaching that just had a greater fullness to it, a greater richness to it. Maybe it is just simply his vocabulary, but it was something more. I couldn't put my finger on it, but he just had like this expansive way with the language to preach.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't like artificial stilted. He didn't fake a British accent or something, but it was. I thought to myself, that comes from your literature background.
Yeah, I think that helps. Yeah. Like, I'm thinking of people like Fulton Sheen. The way that he could paint a picture in your mind with just a few words. Yeah. I think that's a gift with words, where you can use tools like metaphor. So I think those are ways in which you can sort of build a story, especially with a song. A song is kind of like taking a big book or a novel and trying to squeeze that into 3 minutes or 4 minutes, So you really have a limited number of lines and limited number of words that you can use to just paint a picture. And that's where you're forced to have to say a lot with just a few words. And with that, the imagery, the use of metaphor, the use of juxtaposition, the use of all these literary tools comes into play. Because you really have to get across that idea in a very succinct but yet powerful way. And I think it's good that you brought up the idea of people using it for sermons and homilies, because I think a lot of what we communicate is about telling a story. How do you paint that visual in your mind? How do you get someone to imagine a value, or to imagine a future, or to sort of hope in a way where you can tie it in the visual component, like in nature, or something that everybody can relate to. So it has to be an experience that most people can understand. Either flying in, off on an aeroplane, and the longing for that person who has just left. You can paint that in. Or like a good meal.
On a jet plane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because it stirs something. We all know that feeling of saying goodbye, or maybe saying goodbye to a loved one. Yeah, it gets us in a spot.
It gets us in a spot, yeah. So the more you can sort of relate that, you can paint that picture, to allow that person to feel exactly how the emotions are. So another great tool that I remember learning was something called object writing. So it's kind of an exercise where, like, the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning when your mind's all groggy and your editor is still asleep, so you don't get criticized, you pick an object and you write for 10 minutes about it.
Oh, before the internal critic.
Yeah, before the internal critic wakes up.
Really?
So,
that's a real thing? You do it?
yeah. So it's
Okay.
like it's a good exercise. I don't get to do it as often as I should, but it's supposed to be done, daily to sort of just, sharpen the saw, of your writer.
Yeah.
You can pick any object and you write about it from a sensory perspective, like, how to, like, taste, sound, hearing, how does it feel? So, for example, if you were to pick
a cup of coffee.
a cup of coffee, okay, how does it smell? How would it taste if you stuck your tongue into it? Would it be hot? Would it burn your tongue? If you had the coffee going through your esophagus, how would that feel? If you were that coffee in the cup, how would you feel if you were moving around and someone splashed you onto the wall?
Right.
Would you drip down that wall? Would it color it brown? Like, what would it look like? Would it look like like a Franciscan priest prostrating on the ground?
Right.
All those images that come across through your sensory expressions, because we can all taste and we can all touch certain things. My husband was so funny too. He said, it's so funny how if you think about licking something, you can actually feel the texture of it, even though you've never licked it before. Like, for example, the carpet on the ground. If you can imagine licking it, you're like, oh, you can feel the fuzziness of that. Even if you've never really done that, you can imagine that with your senses. So the thing is to give the senses something to do. Like if you're a songwriter, if you're a writer, if you're a homilist, to use as many sensory expressions as you can to get that person to feel exactly the mood, the emotion that you'd like to convey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I was preaching this morning, Saints Peter and Paul. And,
I was there at Mass.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I wish I would have looked up more about those two statues, like of Peter and Paul in front of St. Peter's.
Oh, the huge ones you were talking about.
Yeah.
8 foot.
I mean, I guess they're like 20 feet. I should have looked it up, but they're there with a beautiful fountain.
Ooh.
And I was thinking, like, if I would have described maybe the sound, or I don't even think I said Peter's holding the keys, Paul's holding the sword, but they're like pillars, they're prominent. They're like, there's two things that, like, in this supreme location in the square. And so, I mean, I'm just thinking how that conveys the significance of Peter and Paul, because you got all these statues like above the I forgot what they call it, those columns on St. Peter, the arms going out. Above they have like
I've heard about this, yeah.
Yeah, they got like 80 statues above, but there's only two in the square. There's Peter and Paul, and they're big and they're beautiful with the water. So what's the significance of Peter and Paul for the church, right? I mean, if you go, and I don't know, you're just making me think of that stuff.
Yeah, that's good. It's good because
Yeah.
it's like the whole size of it also gets us to think about how important they are. Like size equates like magnanimity, like, the hugeness of the idea. I mean, and they're the gateway. It's almost like they're the defenders of everybody else behind them.
Yeah.
The idea that, I mean, you painted that in my mind with the smallness of the rest of them being up there, and then you've got to get through Peter and Paul to get through all the rest of the saints.
Yeah, they're like part of the essence of the church there. And so, well, like the connection, like analogy, I think in songwriting and stuff, I met a songwriter one time. He lives up in Nashville, and when you talk to him, I don't know what the quality is, but he was just interesting to listen to. It wasn't like he was maybe saying all these beautiful truths, but maybe like just him describing things in his life. There was like such a richness. Maybe it's this quality you're talking about.
Yeah,
that
could be.
Because then when he told me he was a songwriter, I said, and then I heard one of his songs that he had written the lyrics for, and I thought, you can obviously see it in how he speaks. So you're saying like to marshal all these, as much sensory perception here, right? And in your story or content.
Right, to make people feel what you feel, not to tell them, but to get them to, to feel. So that's interesting that you brought up that Nashville songwriter as well, because this whole idea about the songwriting craft of it, it's very much sort of celebrated in Nashville. With the country music, with the style of writing, it's very much that the classic songwriting feel. Even people like Taylor Swift, I'm sure she uses some of those techniques too in her songwriting, so that she can actually affect a lot of the her listeners, to bring them on a journey.
Right.
So yeah, it's geared towards that craft, the craft of songwriting.
And what about like some people's? I'm thinking of like Motown, like
Motown.
Like they could express feeling with their voice. There's something about how they would use like an intensity in their voice, or there's something passionate about.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah. The whole quality of that singing.
Yeah. It's like there's sometimes I listen to some of the Motown music and it was like there's like this energy in it. There's kind of this power in it.
Kind of a joy too.
Yeah, joy. I was thinking like, is it Aretha Franklin? Some of the stuff she would just kind of sing, just had. I don't know what that quality is right there.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. It's like it's almost like an infusion of joy or that passion, and it's like it's body language. It comes out through the voice. They infuse their voice with that passion for whatever they're singing, and it's genuine too. I think it's wonderful you brought it up too, because I was just thinking a lot of what we do as communicators. They're saying 70% of how we communicate is body language. Like, do people understand what you mean? Do they feel like you're being genuine? And you see that a lot when you go to an open mic. An open mic is where anybody can just take the mic and just sing their song. And then if you notice the people coming up, you realize certain ones you gravitate to and certain ones you sort of like, not sure whether their story rings true.
Right.
And most of the time it's because you can tell from the body language whether someone's speaking from their heart, whether someone really means what they say, whether they're really singing it as something they own, or whether they're just putting on a show.
Right.
And you can tell all that through body language and through maybe the way that they're, even the intensity of that voice.
Yeah.
It all comes together. It's one whole thing. It has to be an organic whole, or somehow you don't feel that it's true. So it's interesting to do that too. And being a mom, I mean, after I gave birth and started caring for my baby, the first few months, the baby just, all you have is to go on is just that facial expression, the body language of the baby, the cry. So you're really attuned to the kid, and the kid starts getting attuned to you. They look to you, and because there are no words there at that point in time, the first few months, it's all about body language. And I think the Lord made us that way because it's so important to be able to sense more than just, more than just what someone says. You really have to look to everything that they are, And if we forget about that, I think that's when we lose touch with our sense of what's real out there in the world. So it's interesting that we've, come into a time when we're so reliant on our screens, where we see stuff, and yes, we can see the body language of people being on our screens, but it's almost like we need to be in that same space sometimes. It's hard to be apart from that. And I think with COVID, it taught us something. It taught us that we yearned for that human touch. We yearned for that space together with, community. We can't be apart, even though it's great that technology can bridge, the gap between isolation and the next best thing. But it's not the best thing. The best thing is still to be in person with someone, or part of a larger community, and to sense that, in a way where technology is still trying to catch up with that. And it's the sense of touch, the sense of, the intensity of the voice, the smell. We can't capture smell over our devices. I think they had something called smell-o-vision a long time back when they were trying to sort of do that. Trying to sort of like pipe in smells from whatever it could be. I mean, they can't capture the whole thing. Our sense of smell is something really powerful. Like, if you smell something, it brings you back. Memories just, trigger something from your youth or from some event in your life. If you smell something, The fragrance industry is huge, but yeah.
Yeah, I think like with pictures too. Like we did some videos for Life on the Rock of like stuff I did like out in nature and talking about, God speaking us through nature and how it helps us connect to God and everything. But it always falls short. Like you shoot it and it just doesn't. I feel like it's like the depth, like the real three-dimensional. It's just a different thing to see it on a flat screen than to see the three-dimensional tree or maybe if you're in a little canyon or something. And movies are amazing sometimes. I guess they're very good at capturing, like I think of like Dances with Wolves.
Oh yeah, that was a beautiful one.
Yeah,
you really feel it. You're immersed in that wilderness.
Yeah, that was like, I thought, the music too, like the stirring music and then these scenes. And I was out in South Dakota. I was at a conference and I took an extra day. I said, I want to go see. I was in college when that movie came out and I just saw it. I thought it was one of the most beautifully shot movies I've ever seen in my life. Wow. And I remember I found out where they shot the film there. And I went, it was outside of Pierre, however you pronounce it, the capital of South Dakota. And I remember I just stopped at the hotel saying, we're trying to find where this road was. And I said, I told them why. And they said, why do you want to go out there? It's like, there's just nothing but fields and stuff. And I got out there and it was beautiful, but the movie did a good, maybe it was the music in it too. And I even they even had a herd of buffalo. I saw a herd of buffalo out there.
Wow.
And,
that's amazing.
Yeah, there's something, and I heard, like, I like some of the music of Hillsong, and somebody, they're doing all these documentaries tearing it apart now, but it's like they have, like this one critic was saying, well, yeah, they take Coldplay and do like chord progressions, and it's moving,
that's
right?
Funny that you say that.
Yeah, and I just was also, I want to show you that later. I just had a video of some Protestant preacher giving this message, and they did a little bit of chord, and it adds so much, like in terms of an emotion.
Yes.
Now what's going on there with a chord?
Yeah, I think my husband would probably appreciate that better too. So I did a little minor in film scoring as well when I was back in Berklee College of Music. It was actually my double major, but I decided to just finish up songwriting. So there's a lot going on in terms of like trying to get the mood. And the certain qualities with it, like I think it's linked to the rhythm and time as well. Our heartbeats, how it stirs up, how it gets faster when we're excited. You notice that the music in movies too, it takes that same tact. It sort of like increases its speed, it increases the intensity because it's trying to sort of like get you to feel those emotions. And so tempo is one way where musicians can sort of try to emote something in terms of the tempo. So if you want something to be relaxed, you notice that the tempo is slower, the mood is, sort of like a bit more lyrical. You get longer notes. You don't get really short staccato beats. The opposite is true. If you're trying to stir up a sense of excitement, like say the buffalo coming at you.
Yeah, right.
You get a lot of percussive beats. You get a lot of staccatos.
Yeah.
You get a lot of like maybe loud trumpet sounds or something. So the whole orchestra, the whole way that people orchestrate, like even in classical music, the way they use certain instruments, like the timpani for like loud, and they want to accent a particular scene, they might bring in something as deep as a timpani or a bassoon or a tuba, like boom, boom, But with
let me just say this real quick. In The Passion of the Christ, they have one scene at the end where Jesus rises, right? And he's in the tomb. He stands up. I think they show you like the nail hole in his palm, and they just hit. It was like a beat. I think it was like a drum.
Oh,
that
wow.
he was like coming.
I forgot about that.
I know, it was so simple, but it was so powerful. I was just amazed how he just captured. Because you could have really, someone could have really just overdone it. But this is down to bare bones, essential, the power of the resurrection. We just saw this gruesome portrayal of the crucifixion, and then just a snippet kind of the resurrection. But he just captured it. I thought the music, him standing up, the profile of Jim Caviezel, like looking for something. I mean, it was just amazing what you could do in 30 seconds or whatever it was,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, I think
But,
that's interesting that
yeah,
you brought that up too. Yeah, sometimes you don't need a lot. Sometimes you
yeah,
just need that visual and there's something to just, be there. Because sometimes if it's too much, it distracts from the essential,
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's an interesting call, I think, and that's where the music director or the composer has to make a call about like what fits in the scene.
right.
Do you have long strings and the note? Um,
Yeah, the strings.
yeah,
What are the violins?
yeah.
This is a really, I don't know if you remember Henry V with Ken Branagh back in the 80s.
Yeah, I think I watched it
Yeah.
because it was part of the whole. There's a homeschooling syllabus that I'm doing with my kid, and we had to watch that. Yeah.
They have a really stirring theme
Soundtrack,
music.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's the violins, and I think it's this chord progression stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
And to me, the whole movie's mostly unbearable, except the speech that he gives.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think we had to watch that.
Because they hit the music during the speech. He jumps up on the log, and I can't remember how the music goes, something, and he's firing them up, and it was like, whoa. I mean, because I went back and watched another version with the famous British actor who did it back in the 50s or 60s.
Yeah, the two versions of that. I can't remember the other guy.
Yeah, the one guy is like considered one of the best actors. But it was like Ken Branagh did I thought it was so much better. I mean, the other guy did the Shakespearean speech version.
It was a bit too far removed, I think.
Yeah, and Branagh modified the speech somewhat. He did, but I don't know. I thought the music and the closest, the expression you saw in his face and everything was.
It's interesting that you mentioned about the music too, and I was just giving this workshop not too long ago about how our lives are like a song. If you're talking about, how when we're trying to make something important, we spend a lot of time on it. We kind of hold that note, over time. It's same deal with music. If we want to sort of emphasize a really important phrase or important word, we give it a whole note. We give it a very long kind of like a pause. But if we want to skip over little things, we'll give it little short notes, and
Right.
it'll go past quite fast. But also the contrast between a long note and a short note, the contrast between a minor scale and a major scale, the contrast between one key and the next, whether it's two dissonant notes rubbing together or whether they're harmonizing in the chord. I mean, there's so much to say for the metaphor of song in our lives. The fact that we're not just playing one single note with our lives, otherwise that would be boring. That wouldn't be a song, that would be a drone, But our lives is such that, sometimes we feel the intensity of the changing seasons or changing situations. Maybe we're chucked into something where it's such a challenging situation, we don't know how we can go on. It's like a cross, and then it resolves again. Or we encounter certain moments in our lives where we feel, hey, this feels familiar. Like I've gone through this before, maybe 10 years back. It's a little different, but it's familiar. And that's kind of like what it is with music too. We bring back these themes, these familiar motifs. We might change it a little higher, we might bring it a little lower, but they're familiar to us because we've encountered it before, but maybe in a different key, maybe upside down, maybe with a little bit of an accidental, like, maybe now it's a bit sharper or a bit flatter. But there are all these beautiful ways in which I think our Lord plans out our lives such that it becomes a beautiful song.
Yeah.
It might, hopefully it will resolve to a nice, perfect ending, according to his will.
I remember Father Benedict Rochelle told us he had this wonderful story about his own call to be a religious and a priest, and he served a lot with mentally ill people. He got a degree in psychology and stuff, and he had a woman that was a shut-in in the neighborhood he was in, and people would say, oh, she's a witch and everything. So one day he climbs up the back stairway.
The Benedict Rochelle?
Yeah, as he's like 5 years old or something. And he stands on a garbage can to peer into the window of her apartment. And when he got up, standing on the garbage can or something, he's peering into the window. Her face is right there.
Oh my God, that's scary.
And I think he fell back.
Oh my goodness.
He ran right to the church and went to Our Lady and in front of the candles. And And I think he said like his call came from there. But he said,
Oh, that's so funny. That's so
yeah,
cute.
like no, so
That's a
he's
great
working
story.
with people that had mental struggles his whole life. He wrote books on psychology and stuff, and had a psychological approach, like in his preaching and stuff.
Wow.
He would just, yeah, he just had a way of like tapping into like the psyche of man, you know, and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And but I remember, I think the point he was making is that God would works with us oftentimes along a theme. Like you could say Mother Angelica had a lot of physical suffering her whole life. Even as a teenager, she had a like drop stomach condition.
Wow.
Made a novena to Saint Therese, was healed of it. But then in the monastery, she had this back condition, you know, needed the braces. So pain was like this constant thing in her life. And and I remember somebody, somehow it came up one time, somebody made some prophecy about her death or something, and she,
Whoa.
like a sudden death or something, and she said, no, the Lord doesn't work with me that way. It's going to be this long. She just dismissed it immediately, you know. But
Oh,
I like
goodness.
that. I never thought about it with music, you know, continuing, because, you know, something too, it's like, it's almost like sometimes I think, like to get something in a movie, they have to, what's like forecast it, or what's the word? I forgot the literature term where they do some scene is kind of like prophetic of what's gonna happen
Oh, yeah,
later
yeah,
in the
yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, so you have to have some experience of it, I think, to understand it better, right?
Like maybe a few little notes here to sort of like think about like, oh, I've heard that before kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, you know, we almost take time to ponder it, to process it, you know, and then when it gets amped up and you know, it has more meaning to us, we understand it, or certainly the audience watching the film will,
Yeah.
you know, understand it.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Even the mise en scène, what they call like the setting of the movie, the colors that they use, or you know, the setting of the table, or how the frame is being framed.
Yeah.
You know,
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing.
That's the word. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Well, what about the connection with story? We interviewed a country music singer one time on Life in the Rock, and he had a big hit about. It was just he was just telling a story of a father like raising a special needs child,
Mm-hmm.
and then the child precedes him in death. And well, I remember he talked about, you know, people. He'd like go to a restaurant and people would be staring or whatever. At some point, you know, he's telling them, "Oh no, he's with me. He's with me." And then later, as he goes through life, the boy dies, and finally he's the end of it. You know that song? He's a famous. I can't forget his name. He's a famous singer, Nashville guy. But
Oh.
but at the end of his life, he goes to heaven and he hears the same thing. He said, "No, he's with me." He hears like,
Oh, they recolored that
yeah,
title. They
yeah.
recolored that line.
So
That's a good way.
he says it about the
yeah.
boy, and then at the end, the boy's in heaven
Says it
saying,
about him.
"He's with me."
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, that's very smart. That's
Yeah,
smart songwriting
yeah,
there.
yeah.
That's a good way to. They call it in songwriting terms. They call it recoloring, because you approach that same thing from a different perspective.
Right.
So I tried to do that with one of my songs because so Pat Patterson, the teacher, he was talking about this recoloring thing. He says, you know, don't just give the listener a laundry list of repeating what you've already said for the first verse when you're going into the chorus the second time around. Give them something fresh to look at that same chorus, but from a different angle, from a deeper perspective. Don't just give them a whole laundry list like you gave them apples, grapes, bananas. Here's another bunch of fruit, and then here's the chorus. No, that's boring. Mm-hmm. So I tried to do that for one of my songs too, called "Fly Away," where the first verse talks about me leaving my mom, sort of like going overseas, and she's sort of like, "Oh, baby, fly away,"
Mm-hmm.
And there's that sadness there. The scenes at the airport. Second scenes where I'm coming back. And the mother is on her deathbed, and sort of like, baby, fly away. It's like she's leaving, she's dying, she's flying away. Yeah. So you sort of repaint that in a different perspective. Yeah.
It's almost like a parable, right? You hear like the grain of wheat must fall to the ground and die. So we hear that, but then it's like when you go through life, you have some sufferings or have some stuff where you gotta die to yourself. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden that parable means a lot more,
man.
doesn't it?
Not easy to live out. I guess the Lord really knew what he was talking about. Yeah, I mean, so many times I will, like a passage from the Bible might not strike me at an earlier season, but when I look at it again, it's wonderful that like talking about themes and motifs, when I approach, a phrase again, I look at it from a different perspective and from a different set of life experiences, and it becomes more true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the living word, it truly is living and breathing and, sort of reminding us of what he says.
And I guess the depth of it too, like with scripture, you can just keep going deeper and deeper into it. And
yeah, that's the beauty of it.
yeah. I guess we got to get you to your plane, don't you? We got to leave it.
I've packed. I've got everything packed, and so it's been nice to be here, just to soak in the atmosphere, to see it up close.
Yeah.
I remember when I first turned on the TV. I was in Boston, studying at Berklee College of Music, and I turned on my TV back in '96. And this TV was, free to air, the little antennas poking up because poor college students, you don't get to subscribe to cable or whatever. Turned it on and dialed the thing, and the only thing up there was this nun sitting in her brown habit, and then I was like, wow, there's a nun on TV. And I just had Mother Angelica. I said, oh, wow. I think it was one of those sessions which was, giving the question and answer, talking, in her way with wisdom and wit. And I was just like, wow, what's this? And I think I completely forgot about it for a while until I went out to LA, and we got our first car. It came with a satellite radio, and for some reason I tune in, and then it said EWTN. I said, oh, these programs are really nice. This is what type of station is it? And I found it was a Catholic radio station. I thought, this is good. I learned so much just from listening in my car for hours on end. You're stuck in LA traffic.
Yeah.
And you just can't get anywhere. Like, 101 and the 405, apparently it's the most congested freeway intersection in the whole nation.
Yeah.
So oftentimes I would be stuck in traffic for hours. And then EWTN, I would listen to, many of the programs. And
what was some of your favorites? Like Journey Home? A lot of people love Journey Home.
I like Journey Home, Max Corday. Yeah. I really did like Mother's, her shows, Live with Mother. I would tune into that. Catholic Answers, I got so much from Catholic Answers. Yeah. So, I mean, just apologetics. I didn't realize, so many unanswered questions that I didn't know I had questions to, all these aspects of our Catholic faith. I learned a lot of it from just listening to Catholic Answers, or just listening to pro-life radio, or just, Raymond Arroyo talking about like certain current affairs. So it was interesting that was, I mean, it was almost like the Lord was just like putting this radio station in my car, and just catechizing me that way.
But you always had the faith. You didn't like leave it or something.
No, I cradle Catholic all the way through. Went for Sunday Mass. Pretty much, I haven't skipped a single Sunday. But I mean, my understanding of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that took some time to form. Even though, I received First Holy Communion, went to catechism classes. But I remember at a certain point in time in my 20s, I didn't really get it. I thought it was a symbol for some reason. And I remember thinking to myself in my 20s that, abortion, it's wrong, but if you're, been raped or in cases of incest, I guess it's allowable. I remember thinking those things and thinking that they were right. So for some reason, maybe my Catholic identity was diluted along the way. But in my 20s, I reclaimed it again. I was in music ministry. I guess through talking with people, through just reading more books, through listening to EWTN, I got to understand, no, life is precious all the way from conception till death. It was so good to be able to listen to the voice of truth, and to know where I needed to be. And it's so good to know that our church has always stood at the forefront of shining that light of truth. Nothing has wavered it even in the face of everybody else that's calling the church like outdated, or like you guys don't know what you're talking about. But where everybody else has fallen off the wayside, I mean, for example, the Protestants, they all agreed that contraception was wrong before 1930 or so. And now with all that's coming into play, you even get Protestant churches that are I read somewhere that some Baptist churches were going into abortion clinics, and some pastor was blessing the abortion clinic. I mean, the Catholic Church would never do that, because we know where the truth is. We know how precious life is. We know about the dignity of every human life, because it's being taught to us. It's being handed down to us. This whole, how the Lord loves us so much that He takes on our bodies. I mean, like He becomes human. The whole body, blood, soul, divinity. I mean, it just amazes me that He can just place Himself fully in us through the Eucharist. The humility of that, and He ennobles our humanity. And like that little part where you're adding that little bit of water to the wine in the chalice. It's such a beautiful way for us to realize that in that drop of water, we're so little, but yet we can be lost in His love, because you can't take that little water, that little drop of water, you can't separate it from the love of Christ. Once it's in that chalice, it's like you can't take the water out.
Right.
And it's such a beautiful thing. It's like it speaks for that ocean of mercy. It speaks for how our Lord will just be with us till the end of time. In fact, that was, I remember there were a couple of moments in my childhood and growing up as a teenager where I was moved by certain bits of my Catholic faith. And one of the lines was that particular line where our Lord says, "I will be with you even till the end of time." And I remember being very moved by that line. I'm not really truly understanding why. But now I look at that line and I see it as His promise that He's there in the tabernacle. He's there in every monstrance. I mean, till the end of time, He's going to be with us in that way, because He's God. He can make it so. That He's there with us. And I find that such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I heard Bishop Barron, I think, was quoting, I think it was Father Faber, was saying that we've broken all the commandments of God, right, as a people, stuff like that. But that is one thing the church has been faithful with is, the church is made up of sinners, right? And but is that offering the Mass, like, do this in remembrance of me. It has been faithful to that somewhere priests are offering the Mass every day. Like, that's part of His promise, like, to be with us. Like, even in this very weak, sinful humanity, I'm going to strengthen the church to be present to us every day in this extraordinary way.
How beautiful is that, right? I mean, I'm just so glad that, I mean, could have been born into an atheist family, could have, wandered around searching for Him for years, but by the grace of God, He placed me where I could find the truth and be fed by it. I mean, how wonderful.
I know. I think about sometimes too. It's like, was my family great catechists and whatever? It's more like just like the witness of this is what we do. I remember going to visit grandparents, and it's like they would love to go to Saturday evening Mass, but that was like that was the pillar of the week. Like, that was you would do that. We might go out to eat after or whatever, but I just sometimes as a kid, I just remember like my grandmother and some aunts, whatever. They're getting dressed up, they're putting the perfume on, they're looking in mirrors. There was this big routine to going to the, and it's, I don't know, it gives you the habit as a child, and you don't, as a younger person even, but it's like you don't understand it, but those habits are so important. I try to assure people, like parents, when their kids leave maybe as adults, that they probably have a lot instilled in them through the witness of you, the habit. It'll be easier for them to come back to confession, right? Or so they saw mom and dad doing it, and they did it some growing up. And so despair is probably not as far off as you think, right?
Yeah, we
But,
all have our journey where we go and journey back.
yeah.
God rides straight with crooked lines, as they say.
Well, Corrinne, thank you so much for
Thank you so
joining
much,
us.
Father.